Korthagen. Fred Korthagen, the professor of education in Amsterdam. His specializations are reflections and self-guidance as the key aspects of professional development. And there's a quotation of Korthagen saying, "I have always been fascinated by the moments when something begins to sparkle in the eyes of people, when they are getting inspired. Then, learning is no longer an assignment, but pure enjoyment of what is happening." Of the paper of Korthagen, because this is the main literature according to the coach at Sahlgren, with the linking theory to practice, changing the pedagogy of teacher education. This paper deals with the problems within teacher education and the need to rethink the relationship between theory and practice. This, as a more traditional application of theory model, has appeared to be ineffective. Korthagen presents two related theoretical bases for a new paradigm in the teacher education. The first uses the concepts of episteme and phronesis to introduce a new way of framing relevant knowledge. The second is a more holistic approach in describing the relationship between teacher cognition and teacher behavior, leading to a model of 3 levels in learning about teaching: the Gestalt level, the schema level, and the theory level. Building on these 2 theoretical frameworks, a realistic approach to teacher education is introduced. The problem of teacher education is that traditional teacher education programs are said to fail in preparing prospective teachers for the realities of the classroom. The question is how to integrate theory and practice in such a way that it leads to integration within the teacher. In teacher education, the desire to use as much of the available knowledge as possible has led to a conception of teacher education as a system in which experts, preferably working within universities, teach this knowledge to prospective teachers. In the best case, a try to transfer this knowledge to the classroom by use of assignments to be carried out during field experiences, but in most cases, theory is presented without much connection to practice. In literature, the transition shock is described. The teachers pass through a quite distinct attitude shift during their first year of teaching, in general adjusting themselves to current practices in the schools, and not to recent scientific insights into learning and teaching. Different studies confirm that the dominant influence of the school on teacher development. The transfer problems is described using a cognitive psychological perspective, where 3 major causes are mentioned. First, students in teacher education do have preconceptions about learning and teaching, but these notions often do not agree with the theories taught in teacher education programs. The teachers within education have a limited view of learning styles of their students and tend to project their own way of learning onto the learning of the students. This problem is due to a lack of integration of the theories presented in teacher education. And secondly, he mentions the feed-forward problem. In order to learn anything during teacher education, student teachers must have personal concerns about teaching, or they must have encountered concrete problems. Otherwise, the fruitfulness of the theory is not clear to them, and they are not motivated to study it. And thirdly, the nature of the relevant knowledge. Teachers need quick and concrete answers to situations in which they have little time to think. This type of action-guiding knowledge is rather different from the most abstract, systematized and general expert knowledge that teacher educators often present to student teachers. This is the major reasons for the lack of success of teacher education in all over the world. And that can be very much transferred to the speech-language pathology. When you're working with the client and you have prepared, you know what you are doing, what you think that you will do, and the problem is that it doesn't fit. So you have to change in 2 rapid seconds. You have to change your thoughts and doing maybe the reverse or something else. So it's very interesting. The use of the old application to theory model used, but very little is published about concrete strategies on how to teach. This means that the traditional approach in which teacher educators make a priori choice about the theory that should be transferred to student teachers represent a very dominant line of thought. The conditions under which teacher education takes place are generally not very supportive of a change in old habits. Large enrollment and limited time for teacher educators to visit student teaching during their teaching practice are inhibiting factors. And a couple of months ago we had a TV show in Sweden that was called the Class 9A, and that was the class of the late elementary school or grammar school, and that's children about 14-15 years old, and teachers that couldn't teach them and didn't have any control, didn't have any goals in their teaching, and then they were guided along or coached by very excellent teachers that helped them along. And that reflects also, as we say, the problem in the school in Sweden today, where or the teacher education, where the teaching students haven't got the knowledge on how to perform in the classroom and how to make the children being seen and how to make those youngsters be motivated for further studies. Towards the new paradigm, reflective teaching, a general tendency is described of good examples of a few isolated educators within an institute that are frequently criticized heavily by their colleagues. As a reaction to weakness of the traditional approach to teacher education, such innovative educators have developed new ways of preparing teachers for their profession, an emphasis on reflective thinking. Theoretical approaches to these mostly in terms of constructivism. But a second theoretical basis for teaching education is needed concerning the relationship between the teacher cognition and teacher behavior. The aim of this paper is contributing to the development of these 2 theoretical bases for a new approach to teacher education, the one concerning the nature of theory relevant to teachers, the other concerning the relationship between teacher cognition and teacher behavior. Korthagen is using the mathematic education as a paradigmatic example. And he presents a new approach characterized by complete break with the traditional approach, which goes from theory, and that is kind of principle or rules that you serve the children with, and turn it to practice. Mathematics is not a created subject to be transferred to children, but a subject to be created. Emphasis is put on the practical use of mathematics, inquiry and reflection, group work, and hands-on activities. And here you can see the influences from Freinet. The realistic approach goes from practice to theory. In this way, the gap between theory and practice disappears, or not being created by the educational process itself. In cognitive terms, the intended learning process starts from situated knowledge, and that is that you create examples and you test them. The realistic approach. During the learning process involved, the teacher-educator has an important role. The kind of support that he or she should offer, including theory, has to be very much adjusted to the specific problems that the student teachers are having. And that is that you have to listen, and you have to check with your students what they actually need.